February is awfully mushy.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Mm-hmm. But it's also so much love. Okay, just kidding. And then we're going to cut, and then we'll come back. Hello, Levi. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Thank you, everyone, for joining us for our second episode, number 2,
We're back.
of Beyond the Oblong Box. I am your hostess, Virginia Poe.
With
And
the
across from
mostest.
me, with the mostest, sometimes. And this is my fabulous co-host. This is Mr. Levi Leland.
Thank you for joining us again, if you're listening.
Yes. So today's episode, before we dive into it, I do have a little announcement to make out loud for everyone. The Poe House Museum and Poe Baltimore, in conjunction with the Bronx Historical Society, correct?
Yes, I think they've been a part of it.
And the Poe Museum of Richmond, Virginia, are they also part? They are also part of this. Yes.
Yeah, they'll be presenting this particular.
Yes. So they are doing a series of programs all month long, in February, or all year long, I should say, for Virginia's bicentennial.
Right.
And their next monthly presentation program is actually going to be on February the 14th.
How romantic.
And we thought we'd just give a little shout out. They're going to be doing a presentation. It's called In Her Own Words. And it's actually the topic of our first mini episode, which is going to be next week.
So we'll be competing there a little bit, but that's okay. There's plenty of...
No, not really, because what they're going to be doing is going to be very different from what we're going to be doing.
Yeah.
But it will be about Virginia's Valentine to Edgar. They're going to have a special presentation of that. I believe Dean Knight is doing that presentation.
Yep.
And then they're going to be having like a graveside chat. So I'm very excited about that. If you're on Facebook, go follow Poe Museum, Poe Baltimore, and they have all the information there. And
definitely worth checking out.
Oh, very much. I'm very excited because I'm actually going to be able to do this one. Very excited. I can't wait to see what they do.
Yeah.
But now getting into our first actual month of shows, we are calling this month All for the Love of Edgar. So each episode this month is going to have a little something to do with love.
Perfect.
Yeah, just a little bit, you know.
My favorite kind of love is like the Poe type love, where the other person dies and then you don't have to deal with them anymore, you know?
Oh, the undying love.
Yeah. No, and then, you know, all the mushy stuff, it's all over with. You can just go lie down by the side, you know, of your darling, your wife, and your bride.
Yes.
And I assume, you know, they're very quiet while they're lying there in their sepulcher by the sea. So
yes,
that's my kind of romance story, you know? Yeah.
It's one of my favorites, to be honest. But yeah, so this episode is called Undying Love. We are going to be discussing, well, Mr. Levi is going to be discussing more. He's going to be presenting us with, what are you presenting us with?
One of my favorite Poe tales in relation to the Undying Love theme, Eleonora, which I'd say it's one of the lesser known tales. I mean, it's, you know, it's not one you hear of often, you know.
No, it's not. But it's very, if you know his history and know his story, it's hard to say that it's not autobiographical because it really truly is.
Yeah,
and I mean, some differences, of course, but it is quite a mirror.
Yeah,
quite a reflection.
Scholars, obviously, there's no doubt it's autobiographical to a degree. I think it's one of the few, if not the only, tale where he actually labels, the unnamed narrator, but we can assume is Poe. Labels the love interest, the cousin, and her mother. And they live together in this remote paradise near the River of Silence. And obviously, anyone that knows even a little bit about Poe knows that he spent most of his life with his cat on his lap. No.
Because cats.
Well, he did actually, but
he did, yeah. Absolutely.
But with his wife and mother-in-law, they lived together, so it's very autobiographical. To give a brief, little overview of the tale. So it was first published in December 1842. It was for the Christmas New Year gift book. It was a tale for that. As I said, it's a tale about, an unnamed narrator who lives in this remote paradise with his cousin, who is his love, Eleonora, and her mother. And, they just have a perfect little life, a perfect romance. But Eleonora grows sick. And it's worth mentioning that now, December 1842, Virginia first started showing signs of tuberculosis in January of 1842.
Yeah.
So Poe probably started this tale shortly after she first showed signs of tuberculosis. So this was, I think, his first, response.
Process. Yeah.
Yeah.
His first processing of what's happening.
Of what was actually going on. Yeah. And in it, Eleanor grows sick. And there's a quote in there that was really profound. And, where the narrator says, she was made in perfect loveliness only to die. So it was like, wow,
Yeah, that's a very chilling.
Yeah.
When you hear, I've recently reread this story and found that I actually had it in audio version.
Ooh,
so
okay.
I drove the other night, and it's not a very long, like, to hear it read, it's only like 16 minutes. It's quite short.
It was like 2 pages, I think, in the particular edition that I read it from. It was like 2 pages. It is a quick little story.
Very quick story.
So anyone listening now, well worth the read because it won't take you long. You can just kind of go right through it, and you'll really get a lot from it, I think. There's a lot to unpack, in this tale. And so, as Eleanor is growing sick, in their paradise, the flowers start to die and things start to get a little bit more gloomy. Yeah. And there was another thing that I thought was quite symbolic in the tale. As she's dying from this sickness, which we can assume is tuberculosis, if it's autobiographical, which it is, right. To Poe's life, and to Virginia, who was dying of, who started showing signs that first year of tuberculosis. Red flowers started popping out throughout their paradise, and those red flowers were perfect metaphor for the blood, for the signs of blood. Yeah. So Eleanor dies, of course. And the narrator vows never to love again after Eleonora. And so, and then he does, with this, this whore named Ermengarde. Now, she, so he meets this woman. Her name was, I wrote it down because Ermengarde was her name. And so he meets this woman and he marries her. So, you know, he breaks his vow to Eleonora, his cousin, that, you know, I will never love again. I will stay true to you. And he breaks his vow. So this is kind of odd, you know, and as I'm reading it, you know, this wasn't the first time I read it, but the first time I read it with a total, you know, intent to like comprehend it and to analyze it. So, you know, he vows never to love, never to marry again, but he does. So Eleonora comes back from the grave, much like in many of Poe's tales, you know, with a woman, the lovely dead female, you know, love interest in the tale comes back from the grave, and it has a happier kind of ending, though.
Yes, it really does.
She didn't come back for revenge. She didn't come back to kill, you know, Ermengarde or the narrator. She comes back to give her approval of this union. Okay. And the narrator at that point says that, you know, the reasons that he had to break the vow will be made known in heaven. And then it kind of just ends. So we're left with a lot to unpack there. You know, if we're going to analyze it from Poe's life and from his perspective in reality and take this as kind of like an allegory. You know, was this a self-soothing kind of tactic for Poe? Was this a way for him to get the message out? Like, you know, I have to move on after Virginia. You know, I can't be alone. I can't go without.
It also makes me wonder, like, what kind of conversations did they have?
Yeah.
You know, was there a discussion? You know, was there a, you know, find happiness when I'm gone? You know, we don't know.
Especially
to me, and that's how it's always read to me, that story was just that, you know, was that, you know, that conversation had already happened, you know, because when you know that this is probably not going to last much longer, especially with someone who does become ill like that and it's terminal, those conversations do happen. So I can't imagine that they didn't happen, you know, in the 1840s.
Already in that. Yeah, exactly. And already in that first year of Virginia showing signs of consumption, you know, and this tale could have just been a projection from Poe to say like, hey, this is how it is going to be. This is how it can be. And it's okay. Because we do know that Virginia did encourage a lot of his, you know, relationships with a lot of his female friends in her lifetime, you know. Frances Osgood comes to mind. Mary Devereux, which is known more by her pen name Mary Starr, who, you know, Virginia took her hand while she was visiting the cottage and took her hand, placed it into Poe's hand, and just told her to look after him and be a friend to Edgar when I'm gone. So Virginia was definitely encouraging of companionship for Poe, even in her own lifetime. So yeah, I agree. There was definitely conversation of, you know, hey, this is ultimately going to be this is what's going to be the outcome.
It's
you know,
the reality of it.
It's essentially a death sentence. It could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 5 years, which it was 5 years. You know, so, you know, this story was very, just very poignant. It had a lot in it that left me wondering, you know. Also, 2 quotes that were in it, which I want to mention. Very famous quotes, and I didn't realize they were both in this tale. The first one is, men have called me mad, but the question is not yet settled whether madness is or is not the loftiest intelligence. That was in it, all in the first paragraph. And then following that was, they who dream by day are cognizant of many things, which escape those who dream only by night.
Yes.
Both those quotes were in this tale. So I was like, wow, I didn't know that. Like, I'm sure I read this tale a long time ago, but
and it
kind of
just
forgot
didn't,
about
it
it.
didn't, yeah. And
And I'm like,
it
it didn't
didn't sink
really
in for a second.
sink in until I read it again, like I said, with the intent to really analyze it. And I was like, oh, okay, both those quotes are in there.
That actually happened to me while I was listening to this earlier this past week. And I was like, oh yeah, this is where they came from. And I'm
right.
like, oh, I forgot that.
Yeah.
Like,
so
even
that
though I read
struck
it
me.
earlier, like I probably read it like maybe, I want to say about a year ago, but it didn't like click. It didn't click. But when I was listening to it, I'm like, oh.
Yep. It just hits you like a like a brick wall. Like, oh, there they are. Those quotes that are so like, overused, honestly. And then you're like, oh, okay, that's where it came from. Interesting. So it was interesting. But again, this story is a perfect theme of, that undying love. It was like, the vow to Eleonora, aka Virginia, technically, right. That I'll forever love you. You'll forever be, my Eleonora, and I'll never find love again after you. But the narrator did, and it was okay. So it's again that theme of, you always love somebody whether they're here or they're gone, and especially in Poe's works. And you can also still love. You can also still be, in another romance that doesn't take anything away from the last one, but it carries on.
Right.
And, in Poe's life, he was engaged twice. He pursued, a few women after Virginia. So this story was kind of set the whole tone for what was to come. And it did for Poe and Virginia. And it didn't take anything away from what they had. It didn't take anything away from, what Virginia was going through, what Poe was going through.
Sure.
He was always devoted to her. She was devoted to him. And, even after her death, Annabel Lee, Poe wrote Annabel Lee. Yeah. And I know there's a lot of speculation about who that might be about, because all these women claim to be Annabel Lee, but this tale
there's no doubt who this is.
There's no doubt. And it even gave, and this is the last point I'll make, because this one really struck me. In the tale, the narrator refers to the bright eyes of Eleonora.
Yes.
And I'm like, okay, Annabel Lee, the narrator, feels the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. So there's no doubt Annabel Lee was Virginia, and that was published, in 1849. This was that was published years after her death. So Poe never, forgot about his love for her. That love never died. That love was undying. And
that was.
And now, of course, they're together for eternity. And, this tale really set the whole tone for that. Yeah. So that's why I chose it for this particular podcast. Because to me, in my opinion, and, there's plenty, I'm sure people can have tales of their own that they think might relate a little bit better to the undying love theme. But this one especially just hit me. So, yeah.
No, and I'm glad this was the one that you chose.
Yeah.
I think it's a nice bridge between our last week's topic and our next week's topic. And I think it's just a nice
carrying out the idea of Virginia and her story a little bit. And this,
absolutely.
like I said, this was one of the few works where he really kind of just calls it out. This is Virginia. This is my cousin. Eleonora is my cousin, my love. I live with her and her mother. I mean, there's no doubt at all. You can't even, debate it. This was Virginia.
I think for me, one of the things about this story that is so striking is, to me, it is a very colorful story, especially in the beginning, before she dies. And there's so much, like, to hear the narrator tell about the fields and the grass and all the flowers, it's like you can see everything.
Very descriptive.
And even, yes, incredibly so. And it's like you don't even have to try hard. You just have to close your eyes and just kind of see. And you can totally see that field, and you can feel how warm that air is and how much love is there without even having any words between them. And it's just incredible. And then when they talk about those first red flowers popping up, it's intense.
It's
very
such
intense.
such an intense metaphor, really. The beauty that, the serene beauty that was Poe's life with Virginia and Maria until tuberculosis, and those little pesky red flowers popping up, the specks of blood popping up. That was just a reminder of the, imminent
of what was happening.
Death, that was to come, kind of interrupting this perfect paradise, such a metaphor, Poe only lived 40 years, but his works, really pack a punch, and they're so extensive, and you can pick out each one, and there's so much in there to unpack. And that I'm grateful for, really, because it keeps us busy, right? It keeps us entertained. And this one struck me like really, really, profoundly for this, particular podcast, because undying love,
can't get much more undying than that.
Right?
And then I think that's as undying as it comes.
Right. And we can't forget about Ermengarde, though,
Oh, yes.
Ermengarde, whoever that may have been. But,
Don't know.
with a name like that, hopefully she,
1 in a million.
Ermengarde. All right. Oh, kind of like, oh my God. Oh my God, it's Ermengarde. She's here to stay.
I must keep my composure. My composure and my
for your
drink
part.
My tea.
Yes.
For my part
Sip
of this
your
podcast.
tea. I'm very anxious to hear about these practices and
So what was one to do if they did not live with their intended love? For Eddie and Virginia, it was, they were right there in the same house. So, and they didn't necessarily have to do all the other things that, the general populace did. So one of the things that I found incredibly interesting, and I've always found it incredibly interesting, is how different our modern day perception of dating and 20th century, 21st century of dating and the courtship practices of the 1800s are. First and foremost, of course, women were never to call on men. That was just a big no-no. But men could call on women.
Mm-hmm.
They could come to the house. Most men were encouraged, gentlemen, I should say, were encouraged to leave a card. And then, of course, calling cards.
Yes.
Calling cards.
You don't just
business.
take them out. You gotta call first.
Yes.
Make sure they're ready.
Mm-hmm. And usually, of course, the young ladies were watching from a window very discreetly as their gentlemen callers, which is where that comes from, would walk away, knowing that they would have to wait to receive an invitation to come back and visit. Dates usually consisted of things like playing games in the parlor, card games, having tea, or there might be music involved, with
that's
with
true
siblings
too.
Or the young lady in question playing piano for her suitor, and the rest of the family, because don't think that the family wasn't around, because they were.
You do need a chaperone, of course,
Yes,
even in the Victorian times, you
absolutely,
know.
absolutely. Of
The
course, young
door better
women.
stay cracked, you know.
Yes. Do not show your ankles.
No. Oh my gosh. Never.
Yes, when people were out in public, women were not supposed to be alone in public. They usually did have someone escorting them, even if it was another female. Wasn't always, having to be another male escorting them around.
Right.
But if you saw someone that you knew out in public, you couldn't just go, "Hey, Joe, how's it going?"
Yeah. Right.
You had to wait for them to acknowledge you by tipping a hat or giving a nod or giving a glance. Like, there were certain things that you had to do. You couldn't just start talking to them.
Right.
Of course, there were all sorts of etiquette books that told you what you were supposed to do
Yeah, that's
and what
right.
you should
Yeah.
not
I forgot
do.
about the etiquette books. I've seen
There were
those. I've
so
read
many.
some things from them that, yeah.
There were so many. There was one, and I believe it is. See, I didn't write down my notes. For shame. I have to sit and think about what I have done by not writing my notes out fully.
Listen, if I had to remember Ermengarde, okay, you.
I forgot the name of one of the guidebooks. I'm sorry. But it was from 1837, I believe. And I can't remember exactly the title of it because there were two from the 1830s that I researched. One of them was called The Lady's Friend, I believe is what that was called. But it was all about what you should and shouldn't do, right? For courtship purposes. But men were highly discouraged of just flirting with every woman out there. You had to be reserved. Because if you just, said hello to every woman who walked by,
Right,
you
not a
would
good look.
never get the woman that you actually want to marry. So, gifts. Young ladies were actually discouraged from accepting gifts unless she was already engaged.
Okay.
And the reason being is because if they accepted one gift, then they would have to accept another gift and another gift and another gift. And even if they weren't interested in that particular gentleman, that gentleman would think that this young woman's interested in me, I'm going to propose,
Right.
and then of course, if she
Lead
was
them
like,
on,
oh,
per
no,
se.
exactly. And that
Yeah.
was very looked down upon. Anonymous gifts, because sometimes women would receive, young ladies of various houses, they would receive anonymous gifts, and they were highly encouraged to tuck them aside and never speak of them again. So if someone sent you something anonymously, you were not really allowed to keep it or to open it or to have it. You had to just act like it was never presented to you to begin with. So also continuing with the thought process of presents, being out in public, men were also encouraged to not really speak in a friendly way, again insinuating flirting or being overly polite, overly kind with other women, especially if his betrothed was not around. Even if she was, it was still discouraged. Because of course that was considered, inappropriate.
Yeah.
Furthermore, they were also discouraged from showing any public displays of affection.
Oh, yeah. I think that should still be a rule
Don't touch
today.
your hand. Don't touch your hand.
Well, yeah.
However, no kissing, no hand holding, but they could do things like exchanging gifts, portraits, locks of hair.
That was a big one. Yeah.
Didn't we talk about that last week? Yes, we did.
I think so. Yep.
Yes, we did. Came out of your mouth. That was part of your part.
I don't know. I rarely listen to myself talk, so you can't quote me on it. I don't know.
But yes, so they would do things like that.
Yeah. And of course, the gifts back then were so much. Obviously, they weren't like a gift would be today. And even now, I even think gift giving in a relationship is almost taboo, unless it's on a certain holiday or something, Valentine's Day or a birthday or an anniversary. It's not, a courtship now is just, going out and having fun, in a way, or having a meal. It's not so much like exchanging gifts back and forth. And, so it's definitely come a long way for sure, obviously in many ways, but yeah. So it's interesting, but yeah, exchanging portraits and, little things, even like I had mentioned, Eleonora being published in a gift book, that was something too. They had publications specifically intended for being used as a gift to somebody. So things like that.
And the letter exchange was also very prominent back then. When young women would receive mail, the one thing that the family was not allowed to do was not allowed to open up letters from a gentleman to the intended. And upon receiving their letters, usually they would go into their bedroom or into another room where they could privately open that letter and read it. Right. And, it was usually, folded in a nice paper, usually with a wax seal so that they knew it was closed. I find that very attractive. I like wax seals. It's classy.
It is.
Nobody
it's
does
a nice
that
aesthetic,
anymore.
and it's also like a sensory thing. You ever like stamp
wax?
It's
I
like
love
and then you let it, harden a little bit, and you peel it off. It's like
it's very satisfying.
Yes,
I have wax seals.
Yeah, I actually do as well, and it's a nice little touch on a letter for sure. If you want to pretend you're a Victorian suitor. Or just just trying to make a letter look nice.
Exactly.
I mean, I don't wax seal my car payment or anything, but
yeah, that's not
they don't deserve it.
Wax. No, they don't. But yeah, so there were lots of interesting things that they did that clearly we don't do anymore. Another thing in the 1800s was the visitation candles.
Okay.
The black metal that had the spiral base, and depending on how high or low the candle was set within this base, they had until the candle reached the metal ring.
Interesting.
To visit. And so if the father or the mother didn't particularly like this particular person, they would set the candle all the way down in the very bottom. So that usually there was about this much candle to burn before you would have to get out.
Set the timer a little bit lower.
Yeah, exactly. And so of course with the candle holder, that it was also so that you could adjust it so it would set higher, so that only about this much candle was actually in this very tall base. And I've seen ones that are a little shorter as well, but the bases were usually probably about 6 inches of a 12-inch taper. I mean, so it wasn't like you had long.
Right.
You better say what you got to say now because you're going to be out in 10 minutes.
Right. You could probably, the suitor could probably guess how interested the lady was depending on how the candle was set. Oh, look at all the time she gave me. Oh, look at all the time she gave me. It's like, I can see where this is going. It's like looking at your watch during a date. Yeah. So it's funny how, the customs are so different, but I think the reaction to them, the human response is still very much the same as it is
very
today.
much the same. Yes, absolutely.
Definitely. So fascinating. I mean,
yeah, it's funny how some practices and sentiments behind these things are actually still present now.
right.
I mean, like the whole concept of, not flirting with every single woman you see because, well, you probably shouldn't flirt with every single woman you see. Yeah. But we've seen it at the clubs. We know this.
Right. Yeah. Like, and
see that guy that bounces around every girl in the club.
Just,
you're like,
just fishing and waiting to,
stay
someone
away.
to take the bait. Right.
So guys, don't do that. Not a good look.
Yeah.
But yeah, so I mean,
just cut off a lock of your hair and mail it to her. That's perfectly fine. She won't think you're a serial killer at all.
Yeah. And that's, because that's not exactly something you would think of as being a token of love, but then it was, now most people would find you creepy.
Yeah.
But back then it was considered a rather intimate thing, because it literally was a part of that person. So, which I do think is quite romantic.
Yeah, it is.
I sometimes wonder if I was born in the wrong time.
Yeah, I think, I can agree with that sentiment. I definitely think,
Sorry, a cat just jumped up in my lap. So for the people who are watching my video, our video, I should say, my eldest, Lucian, just jumped up in my lap earlier. The cat that everyone saw was my youngest, Gabriel, who is now in his little spider bed.
Yeah, I feel like the cats might hide when there's Poe talk,
Oh, they do. And last week...
They've read The Black Cat.
They have read The Black Cat. All of them have. Mommy has read it to them.
Right.
Now, and last week, Elliot was in my lap. So if anyone heard purring or the jingling of a bell, that was my middle cat.
Yes.
My Ginger.
There was no premature burials in your nearby cemeteries. You weren't hearing the bells of, the alert bells.
Yes.
It was just a cat. So
that was just a cat's collar shaking, and so I'm surprised he didn't come up on audio because he was purring at one point. And he's a very loud purr. So
he just wants to be a part of the podcast. We can add him into the credits.
Oh yes,
no problem there.
All the boys are very, very keen on the video. They're divas. They're stars. They're cats.
Right.
They want to on the piece of the action.
Who can blame them? Undying love. That's a topic everyone can talk about.
Yes.
Whether you got 2 legs or 4.
That's right. That's right. But yeah. So that's pretty much the
gist.
Abridged.
Right.
It's the short, sweet. But yeah, so not everyone was fortunate enough to live right next door to the person they were intended to have, a life with. And really, truly, when you decided that this was the person that you wanted to have that life with, that was it. You didn't communicate with other people. It was them and them alone. Yeah. And courtships usually didn't last very long. They were usually very in comparison to some standards. Lucian, please lay down, buddy. Okay, there you go. You got an arm? You good? Okay. Especially like, I've had friends who have been engaged for years.
Yeah.
But it was usually, and especially if you think about things like especially in England with the season, where from January till June, women came out and they would have balls, and you were usually, well, the really hoity-toity ones, like they were presented to the queen and and all that kind of fun stuff, and came to court. But there was a season where all the eligible young ladies were being pursued, and usually mating before season, June, right? I'm sorry?
Mating season, is that what they call it now, or
no?
Oh, okay. Oh.
No,
I'm thinking of something else. Hunting. I don't know.
But yeah, so I mean, usually, and if a young lady didn't have a suitor or a proposal by June, they would start to, it was
get a little discouraged, and
very discouraged.
Like, well, better luck next year.
Yeah, and that's what would
appropriate
happen.
Times, and for
Yep. That didn't happen as,
I mean,
not to say that sort of practice didn't happen here. It just wasn't as prominent.
Yeah.
As it was in England. And I think that was really more for higher society, socialites here.
Yeah. Yeah, which would make sense. An excuse to have a
debutante
ball
balls.
And and to kind of flaunt your wealth and your family, and that would be a way to kind of match make, like, okay, who's going to be the right suitor for our daughter, who, and we all come, if you come from wealth and you're kind of exhibiting it within your household, within a party, it's just another way to match make, I guess, in a way. So I can kind of see what the tactic is behind that to a degree.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, there we go.
Undying love.
Undying love. Till death do you part.
See, right. So
we'll think about it.
It does die, I guess. Love does die. And Poe was all too familiar with that.
Yes, he was. So sad, but so very true. Well, we hope you enjoyed our podcast today. And we certainly hope you come back for our first little mini episode.
Right. That'll be fun. That'll be
a nice little morsel, because I have some really interesting things to talk about.
Yeah.
That's going to be fun. So next week's episode is going to be our first little mini episode in between our longer episodes. That is our Be My Valentine episode, where we are going to be talking about Virginia's Valentine to Edgar. And we're also going to be talking about Valentine's Day in the 1800s. Who knew?
Right?
Where it really all started, guys. Just saying.
So we have them to blame. Okay.
We do. We really do. But yes, so we hope
should be a fun
back.
discussion.
It's going to be a good discussion, I think. I think it's going to be a fun discussion. But yeah, so we hope you join us again next week at 3 p.m. on all podcast platforms. Yes, eventually, YouTube. Hopefully by that time, Pandora will even have us, and so we'll tune in. But everybody else has us now, so fantastic. Thank you for letting us be part of your little club. And of course, if you're watching us live,
we're worthy, I guess.
Yeah, right. I mean, hey, Apple took us, so.
Wow. I'm actually shocked by that.
I know, right? I'm like, wait, how did we get on here? But yeah, so we also, of course, have our YouTube channel, so you can see our bright, shining faces.
See the video part.
Yep. Yeah, for the video part, and can even see There's Lucian.
Guest appearances.
Smile at the camera, buddy.
Okay. He looks unamused by this.
He
I
was asleep.
Oh.
I'm so mean.
I don't blame him. Undying love, Valentine, mushy love, romance, and yeah, I don't blame him. This is unbearable.
Yeah, he's just gonna sleep through it. But yeah, so we'll be back at 3 next week for that, as usual. And also, too, remember, mark it on your calendars. If you're on Facebook, go check that Facebook page with Poe Baltimore about their February 14th In Her Own Words program. I'm very excited about that.
Yep.
I will be in attendance for that online.
Yes.
And then, of course, find us on Facebook. Give us a like. We have suggestions. We have our own private Facebook group inside the oblong box.
Questions are always welcome because we'd love to answer some of them for the mini episodes, because those will be fun little discussions. And then, listeners can tune in to see if their question gets answered. And
absolutely. And eventually we're going to be doing these live. Eventually.
When we get really brave.
Yeah. Yeah. So we get really brave. But
that means anything could happen. So tune in for those.
That's going to be wild. But yeah. So so definitely come back and join us next week for our next episode.
Definitely.
All about Valentine's Day in the 1800s and Virginia's Valentine to Edgar herself. Levi, you
don't want to miss that. Yes.
Thank you, Levi.
Thank you. Another great one.
All right. Well, we'll see you soon. Yeah. Bye, everybody.